triumph of righteousness and justice over wickedness is an eternal truth that has persisted throughout all realms and ages. A band of heroes had gathered to vanquish the Demon King, whom they believed to be the embodiment of all evil and the root of their problems. If it could be arranged, it was his fate to meet them. No one was ever supposed to show up here, but the Demon King 100H Demon King Luruslia Nord introduced himself in a chilly voice as the supreme ruler of all demons, as befits a wicked Demon King. So that nobody would suspect a thing, he still greeted the hero group, even though he had already accepted his fate. When exactly it began is difficult to determine. People have thought of demons as wicked from ancient times. Many demons have been slaughtered in the pursuit of justice due to this kind of bigotry. Because evil always finds a way to spread, the demons retaliated. Finally, swords were drawn by both factions. In the middle of an ocean of violence, there was no room for compromise. Everyone involved acted irrationally. It was completely ridiculous to think that the victor of this meaningless game would undoubtedly become world ruler. Another conflict would be sparked by whoever emerged victorious. When confronted with overwhelming power, humans naturally react with dread and seek to neutralize it. The most powerful heroes in this world eventually vanquish the Demon King in the future. There had to have been something. That he had never discovered a solution to that mystery was something the Demon Lord lamented. Once humans and demons crossed the border, there was no turning back. Now the only option was to fight till the very end. The Demon Lord, having enchanted himself, positioned himself before the hero. The hero's squad was formidable, even against the Demon Lord's immense might. They were supported by gods and spirits, and had overcome numerous obstacles. The fight ought to have been a feast with both sides holding trump cards, but justice would ultimately win out. It was an undeniable fact that had been preserved through the ages. A holy sword sliced into the Demon Lord's heart, illuminating his dark power and destroying it. In that instant, the Demon Lord's adversaries, the Archmage, the Saint, and the Swordmaster, became crystal obvious. They were well prepared. The heroes represented righteousness, and the Demon King evil. Suddenly, Lus's face lit up with a smile. Observing this, the hero inquired as to the reason behind his laughter and whether he was planning anything. But there were no evil schemes or traps hatched by the Demon Lord. A completely other cause than his impending death was the fact that tomorrow was scheduled to be his friend's daughter's birthday celebration. His vow to pay her a visit on her birthday would never materialize, much to his disappointment. The demon's extinction was imminent. After his death, the demons would be subjected to persecution and eventually eradicated. If current events persist, the demons may vanish as a species, and his friend's daughter's life would be tragically ended alongside theirs. This left the hero, disguised as an iron mask, staring in bewilderment. He howled as if he had suddenly realized something. A moment of reflection passed before the hero nodded and managed to stutter that the words that the Demon Lord had spoken were not false. The hero's eyes had previously shown nothing but murderous rage, but now Lus could hear the hero's humanity and warmth in his speech. Because of this, in his dying hours, the Demon Lord chose to stop being so hateful and instead speak honestly. For now both humans and demons had done nothing but randomly murder each other. Although the church taught its followers that demons brought evil, the truth was that humans and demons were really very similar. They behaved in the same way. The hero should see it for himself if he doesn't believe him. He needed to be objective in his understanding of the church's doctrines regarding demons. Demons and humans alike would have a fighting chance in the future, if he could even moderately question the wisdom of eradicating all demons at the church's behest. The holy sword's power caused Lus to feel as though his body was being transformed into ether in the air. The hero's expression was one of deep absorption. He yearned to comprehend the meaning of the Demon Lord's remarks, which remained with him. In this way the Demon Lord discerned that the seeds had been sown. Darkness engulfed his thoughts the very next second. A voice said, "Understood. I believe you. Without prejudice, I will look the demons straight in their eyes." The hero suddenly grasped the situation. His pledge to the Demon King was that he would end his bias toward demons. With those words in his ears, Lus could finally rest easy. The hero's high-pitched voice and gender identity were the first things the Demon Lord noticed. As his field of vision faded, the hero's fellow soldiers' faces were his final sight. The saint then materialized before his hazy eyes for an instant. His expectation that she would celebrate his demise was shattered when he saw her countenance. Nonetheless, Lus no longer placed any significance on it. Prior to his demise, the hero's promise occupied all of his thoughts. There would be better times ahead if she held on to it. After losing to the hero, the Demon King vanished from existence. There is a happy conclusion to the story. The conclusion, however, it turned out that way. It was long thought that demons, in contrast to humans, could not experience rebirth after death because they lacked a soul. So it came as quite a shock to the 100th Demon Lord Luruslia Nord when he opened his eyes. A soft female voice greeted him with a Luru and a good morning the second after that. A stunning human woman stood before him, her eyes shining with an overwhelming sense of love and warmth. It took a moment for Luruslia to process what had transpired, and the significance of the human woman standing before him. The woman standing before him wasn't very startling, but her enormous stature baffled him. In his day, there were few attractive women with larger hands than his, despite the fact that he didn't have the largest. But in contrast to this lady, his hands were little and swollen, like those of a newborn. Maybe it was the other way around. She wasn't huge, and he was little. That became apparent to him after some time. It had occurred, the occurrence that had been discussed among demons. In that instant, Luruslia had a thought. The woman was releasing the aroma of sweet milk, and he felt a gentle, comforting warmth. We learn that she is our hero's mother via her words and deeds. His mind ultimately slipped into blackness when he came to this realization. In this realm, human and demonic spirits are identical, regardless of what anyone thinks. A new form of the monster will emerge from the ashes regardless of what happens to its physical form. Reincarnation occurs in two forms, one into the same species and another into an entirely different one. There's no end to the revolving door of life and death. Even devils believed this myth. Even though Luruslia first didn't believe it, he eventually came to accept it as true, especially after considering the possibility of experiencing it himself. The days spent with his loved ones and other soldiers, as well as the moment a hero vanquished him, were vivid in his memory. He couldn't help but wonder why his memories of his previous existence as a demon lord were brought back with him. Nevertheless, Luruslia's thoughts remained empty regardless of his efforts. At the moment, his only options in this body were to eat and sleep. There was no way it could have been a negative thing. His official duties as a demon lord kept him busy all the time, but now that he was a baby, he could finally relax and enjoy life. He wasted no time though, and set out to gather further details right away. The woman, who was probably a maid, was obviously rather nice, but he was too sick to even ask her a few questions at the moment. In any case, the sudden emergence of speech from a newborn would be quite unusual. Now that he had his body under control, he could no longer get the knowledge he needed. Currently, his only option was to observe and take notes. Nonetheless, he was still able to glean some fascinating information. He observed the maid as she used her stick to perform a magical ritual. But it wasn't the existence of magic that caught our hero off guard, it was the girl's sloppy grammar that baffled him. In addition, he was certain that neither chance nor tools were necessary to do such elementary magic. It seemed unusual, but Luruslia had not utilized magic since his rebirth and was eager to find out how powerful his magic was. Due to the inherent weakness of humans compared to demons, our hero had low expectations for this vessel. However, his magical abilities were far more than he had anticipated. Not only was it massive, but his new body also contained the magical power and memories of his previous life. Its quantity remained unchanged from his days as a demon lord, but the issue was that he was no longer able to manage it to the same degree as previously. No one knew for sure if it was due to his humanity or his immature physique. Nonetheless, that wasn't an issue. With enough training, this could be resolved in no time. Our hero wasted no time in beginning training after quickly determining that no one was in the area. He had to gain strength quickly, therefore that's why he was in such a hurry. In his prior existence, he was also annihilated due to a lack of strength. That could not happen this time. After 7 long years, the demon lord regained his memories and resumed his life as a baby. His human parents had given him a new name, and he had taken it, Luru. There had been significant alteration since he was a newborn. He was free to pursue his interests at his leisure in the library. Furthermore, he could practice magic without worrying about his family members catching a glimpse. Fearing that she would be unable to use magic to its maximum potential was Luru's initial concern. But with time and practice, he was able to become rather proficient in magic, although that was far from being his maximum. While he had faith in his ability to utilize small-scale magic, he was unable to put that faith to the test just yet. Evidently, he had no desire for a spell of that caliber to wipe out a whole village. Aside from magic, he had additional insights into his new existence and world, for example, that it had been several thousand years since the heroes vanquished him. Conflict, by which humans and demons interacted, had devolved into an urban legend, the specifics of which were lost to memory. It was thus not unexpected that there had been a dramatic change. Our hero's mom peeked into his room as he was thinking about this. His mother was unsurprised to see this book in Luru's hands because he frequently rereads novels containing tales about demons. Modern people believed in demons, but they viewed them more as fantastical monsters from folklore. The stories said that they had departed from this realm and were now known as old devils. His family, thankfully, didn't object when he read about demons. They thought he was simply a kid, susceptible to the allure of fiction at that age. Our hero was unconcerned by the widespread disbelief in demons. His demons were so much more robust and long-lived than humans. Luru reasoned that there must be some left in the planet. As a result, he thought it was hopeless to wipe them all out. Finding the demons was Luru's objective. Because he was only 7 years old and couldn't even leave the hamlet freely, it was too tough for him to grasp it at the moment. Reading and practicing magic were his only options at the moment. On top of that, his mom had told him his dad would heading home soon. The letter said it would be in 2 weeks, so he could expect to receive additional books shortly. The lord of the village of Cetis and sword instructor of the Knights of the Kingdom of Leonard was Patrick Cetis Nora, his father's name. He was a decent man and Luru adored him. He had been eagerly anticipating his return for what seemed like an eternity, since it would finally allow him to study swordsmanship from him. The good news about his father was so overwhelming that Luru entirely disregarded his pledge to play with his pals. Even though his mother yelled at him to hurry up and get outside right away, he was still running a bit behind schedule. At the designated meeting spot, all of his companions were already waiting for him. Cheers erupted from them as they welcomed him. "Luru, you've come at last. You're late." Since he had informed our hero about the appointment yesterday, the red-haired boy promptly scolded him for being tardy upon his arrival. An apology was the only option available to Luru. He blamed himself for staying up late reading. Our hero's first companion, a redhead named Rusty, was the type of young man who thought lads should spend their lives exploring the world. Need some words? An intrepid explorer was his lifelong ambition. However, Mia believed that Rusty could only ever speak about adventures because he had failed the swordsmanship test given to Patrick's son. Nobody would allow him to leave the village unless he had that. In spite of his annoyance, Rusty was unable to raise an objection. What Mia meant was that she didn't want him to leave the community because she was worried for him, not because she was spiteful. They had Yuri as their second female employee. Contrary to Mia, she rallied behind Rusty. He emphasized the significance of having a dream and expressed her belief in his ability to achieve it. These three had been companions of our champion since the time of his rebirth. Even if they had their share of disagreements and rocky patches, Luru could state without reservation that they were friends. He had observed long ago that the girls' reluctance to let Rusty leave the hamlet was due to their affections for him. But he had picked a sort of genuine Sigma rather than the two lovely women. He actually believed they were merely attempting to annoy him and was blissfully unaware of the truth. More importantly, our hero wanted to know why Rusty had brought them all here today. He didn't say why, but his upbeat demeanor made it seem like it wasn't for fun. Luru was correct in his expectations. Shortly after, Rusty enthusiastically revealed that the true adventurers were going to show up in their little town. Since genuine adventurers seldom made it to such a remote village, the three of them were taken aback. They could be no more than any other trade guard, which gave Yuri reason to be suspicious. But Rusty shot that down the river. These, he said, were the true adventurers. Powerful and fearless, high-ranking adventurers were the ones that bravely ventured into unexplored territories. Everyone could see just why Rusty was beaming with joy. Indeed, to a lad with aspirations of becoming a legendary explorer, their very presence was akin to a hero's entrance in the town. To meet the adventurers at the village entrance and ask them many questions, he had gathered them all. They hurried to the village gate with all of their eager companions present. Was already a large throng present, and they were all eager to meet the genuine explorers. Little did Rusty expect, nobody had turned up just yet. Even though he wanted to meet them right away, he was prepared to wait as long as they needed him. He dashed to the entrance, still unable to endure the delay. After hundreds of years on this planet, Demon Lord Luru still wasn't too forthcoming with his emotions. Nonetheless, he found it intriguing to witness his friend's joy. Being an explorer meant discovering new worlds and slaying terrifying beasts, both of which were foreign concepts to our hero. Before it wasn't necessary, but now, for whatever reason, the once inhabited regions are deserted and dangerous. Luru wanted to know what was inside. Out of nowhere, a startled scream jolted him out of his reverie. The culprit, it turned out, was a massive tiger that materialized from thin air and immediately charged at Rusty. In the midst of everyone staring at him, he stood terrified as the creature drew near. As soon as he saw this, Luru got ready to protect his comrade. A monster of this level was no match for him. Having said that, he was completely pressed for time. A dazzling green light flashed over the sky as he was past. The sudden apparition was caused by an elf who started reciting a spell the second it materialized. The tiger was swiftly propelled into the air by the green light, where he met up with another adventurer brandishing a massive sword. In a moment, the two of them had already removed the beast's head in one swift motion. Even Luru was taken aback by the amazing sight. The moment the tiger passed away, its remains started to dissipate, seemingly disappearing into thin air. The intrepid explorer saw Rusty, who was still on the ground and very scared, and immediately wanted to know whether he was okay. Incredible things had transpired to Rusty so quickly that he was momentarily unable to speak. But the second he regained consciousness, he sprung to his feet and yelled out with glee that it was fantastic. He was overjoyed and thrilled to be alive, that he neglected to express his gratitude for their rescue efforts. Simultaneously, an elf adventurer came up to them, welcomed them politely, and expressed her joy that everyone was healthy. Because she had pointed ears and incredible magical abilities, Luru's friends were already thrilled when they saw her. Even though he was quite near, Rusty was still incorrect in his assumption that she was a ghost. Yumi was an elf, born into a race that was named after the element of air. However, the man went by the name Gran. They had been traveling with Yumi for a long time, and he was an explorer. Observing from a distance, Luru couldn't help but notice their impressive skill level. He had never experienced the hamlet with such a surge of magical power before. In an instant, Yu saw that Rusty shared the village children's aspirations of becoming a legendary adventurer. When she questioned him about it, her suspicion was confirmed right away. Gran was overjoyed for him and advised him to put in the time and effort necessary to reach their level of strength. After Rusty assured Gran that he would do his best, Gran complimented him and stated he was promising. After showing Rusty the way to the inn, he also promised to fill him in on some exciting tales. Yuri and Mia both saw the boys and thought they were the same after observing them. Simultaneously, Yumi went up to our champion. After observing the girl's expressions toward Rusty, she felt compelled to inquire about their relationship. Their relationship, according to Luru, was a classic love triangle, and he was merely a bystander. The elf was taken aback by his response, but she urged him to move quickly and form relationships with attractive girls like these before he was passed. However, Luru felt that it was slightly inappropriate for her to offer such advice to a young boy. He said, with an obviously improper 7-year-old grin, that he preferred to sit on the sidelines and watch. The elf's expression twisted in response to his comments, and she couldn't help but observe his peculiar interests. Since Luru was helpless to disagree, he changed the subject and volunteered to accompany her to the inn. After a difficult battle, and being assaulted by monsters on the way there, Yuz was fully in favor of it. The town's soul-watering hole was bustling with activity as night fell. The locals would usually congregate here to imbibe, but today there was an unprecedented level of activity. Because it was such a monumental occasion, even the little ones were welcome to attend, and a couple of daredevils were in the middle of all the hubbub. Their interesting tales were well received by the audience. The tales of weary travelers were one of the few forms of amusement available to the villagers. They recounted a string of problems and the solutions they found. Already their biggest fan, Rusty, hung on their every word. In due course, one of the guys approached them and asked why they had come. He had heard rumors that they were going to view the ruins outside the village. When or why they were created was a mystery to everyone. The remains were ancient and plain, with no obvious features. But Yumi didn't believe it, because she had seen like artifacts in the past. She was sure that ancient demons had constructed them, even though she hadn't found any tangible evidence of their existence. Gran took a more practical view. He was certain that, with no knowledge available at the moment, it would be exceedingly difficult to ascertain whether or not it had been constructed by demons. Because of his personal experience, our hero Luru could instantly discern if they belonged to ancient demons or not. Yet, due to the paucity of documents and other information regarding demons, our hero Gran was also of this opinion. His inability to back up his claims with evidence was the sole catch. It broke his heart to know that the legendary race of demons was nothing more than a fabrication. Mia and Yuri were both discovered that Gran's activities mainly consisted of monster hunting, exploring ruins, and competing in tournaments. As Luru looked at these two, she couldn't help but feel jealous. Unrestricted freedom to pursue his interests was just what he had been longing for in his previous existence. Their actual spirit was that of adventurers. Just by observing them, he could tell that this trip was really making their hearts sing. As our hero pondered this, a jubilant Rusty went up to Gran. He spoke clean about his past laziness in training, but he begged to be his pupil and made a sincere vow to do better going forward. Gran casually turned him down, much to his disappointment. As soon as Rusty heard such an outright rejection, he started to cry. But the explorer had good reasons to say no. Being an explorer meant more than simply going on exciting adventures. It also meant taking on risky situations. Unfortunately, he lacked the resources to adequately care for him until he reached adulthood. Nevertheless, Rusty found optimism in those very words. As he matured into an adventurer, he hoped to take him on as a disciple. He wondered if it was possible. Ran gasped when she heard this. Such a kind request was too good to pass up. At the appointed hour, he assured Rusty he would take over as master. Rusty's level of joy and excitement is difficult to discern. He was quick to express his deepest gratitude to the generous adventurer. To see his friend succeed, Luru felt joy. In addition, he said that Rusty had an unexpected talent for persuasion. Even though Rusty's mother wasn't convinced by his claims that he should become an explorer, our hero was certain that Rusty would be just fine. He had potential, according to even his father. The proprietor of the inn soon made the announcement that the kids should all head home. It was also our hero's turn to depart. On this day, he had not only met some fascinating people like Gran and Yumi, but he had also learned a great deal. After bidding farewell to the explorers, he eagerly anticipated the day when he might embark on his own global journey. He recalled that their community had never been so active on his journey home, but the isolation that follows a good time at a party always comes back. His mom's voice pierced the silence as she turned to him out of nowhere. She began to say, "You too someday," but she abruptly stopped herself before she could finish. She admonished him to disregard her words and disregard the situation. She was able to express herself freely since Luru had a deep understanding of her emotions. He was aware that he would have to leave the town at some point, and that they would have to have that conversation then. Things started off usual the following morning. No matter what came up, Luru made it a point to practice first thing in the morning. Miss a day and you lose 3. This principle was applicable to everything, not just skills, but also magic, martial arts and real life. Luru shared this belief, which is why he practiced daily. Persistence and consistency always yield amazing results. Unlike when he was a newborn, he now has full control over his body. Because of this, he trained in both magic and martial arts. Following an early morning meal and lunch, he would travel to a remote location far from the settlement to practice mana manipulation and wield a homemade wooden sword. The methods he used were ones he had studied previously. While his father Patrick had instructed him in the human sword style as it is today, he possessed the ability to transform into a demon if the situation demanded it. The fact that his father was a skilled knight meant that he could anticipate his adversary's moves with ease. In a training match, Luru's father would surely notice that something was amiss if he utilized the Demon Lord talents. The ability to switch between human and demon ways was another skill that Luru had been honing throughout her training. He intended to reserve this ace for the most dire of circumstances. He was making his customary way home as the sun began to drop, but this time he observed that the village was noticeably livelier than normal. The guys were frantically running back and forth, attempting to ascertain the situation, while the women were visibly distressed. Approaching Rusty's parents, who were especially concerned, Luru made her way over. The moment she laid eyes on him, she wanted to know where he'd been and whether he'd seen the others. She seemed even more terrified and frantic after getting the negative response. The explanation for this response was straightforward. Yuri, Mia and Rusty had vanished. When the woman informed Luru that Rusty and the others were gone, she looked terrified. Luru was taken aback by the news. His reply led the woman to believe that he hadn't even seen Rusty. The fact that she hadn't seen the children since that morning led her to believe that they had sneaked out of the bar without permission, especially since she remembered that they had been reluctant to go the previous day. It could be done, Luru agreed. He thought back to yesterday's discussion and recalled that Yumi had said she was planning to visit a ruin near this settlement. Even though Luru had never been there before, he reasoned that it should be the other way around, beginning with their village. Then he told the woman he was running away to find his pals. When the woman warned him not to travel somewhere risky, he only said he would try his best, but the well-being of the children came first. Wanting to go as far as needed since those kids were the first friends he made as a human, when he goes back to the forest just near the village, he instantly finds Yumi. He stared at her, and she also saw him. Shockingly, she ordered him to stay back, and she started to cast her magic power to put a barrier around the village. But Luru is asking her to stop. He informed Yumi that Rusty and the other kids are currently missing. Yumi was shocked upon hearing it. Luru then said that his friends were probably not in the village, and people were saying that they might have gone into the ruin. He wanted to ask Yumi and some adults to go into the ruin, but then Yumi suddenly flinched and apologized since she could not stop the cast anymore. At this time, the Mystic Wall Arcanum was activated, and the barrier would make them unable to leave the village until it disappeared. Luru asked her why she activated it, and she told Luru that he must understand since she needed to protect the people inside the village. Yumi was about to say more, but there was something that disturbed them. It was a magic mae, and according to Yumi, these creatures came out from the ruin. Several of these machines had been flying into the village, which is why she rushed into this area just to make a barrier. With everything that was happening, Luru knew that things were getting bad. He also deduced that the magic machine's feet were basically magical cannons. On top of that, he was aware that this was a magical weapon made by demons to kill humans. The magic machine started attacking the village, but because of Yumi's barrier, the place was safe. However, people were scared as expected. One thing he was worried about was that these creatures might fly into the close villages or cities to attack helpless people. As per Yumi, the ruin itself was not that strange. When they were about to go back to the village, the wall of the ruin collapsed, and Gran should still be fighting the big magic machine up until this point. Because of her statement, Luru was sure that the magic machines were trapped in the ruin. One thing he was sure of was that there should be a device that controls these machines. He then informed Yumi that he needed to go somewhere right now. Yumi was shocked and worried for him. She apologized since she didn't have any intention of canceling the barrier, no matter what. Also, she told Luru that there was nothing he could do since he was just a little kid. Additionally, only she, the caster, could designate whether someone was allowed to pass through or not. He ordered Luru to go back home, but Luru was too hard-headed. He touched the barrier bare-handed, and his power appeared. He managed to release his hand from the barrier, and seeing what he just did made Yumi shocked since she never permitted Luru to pass the barrier. Luru looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to rewrite this magic equation. With this barrier is also mine." Yumi was confused, knowing that someone cannot rewrite someone else's magic. Still, Luru passed through the barrier, which surprised Yumi the most. Before heading to the ruin, Luru informed Yumi that he was a bit worried about the power output of her barrier, so he enhanced it a little and made it from Yumi's mana. In addition, Yumi would not be able to go outside the barrier. He also made the same rules about who could pass through the barrier in case Rusty and the others came back, hoping Yumi would take care of his friends. I'm counting on you. I am going to find Rusty and the others, he said, then ran away from the village, heading to the ruin. Yumi screamed asking him to stop, but he didn't listen at all. After he left, Yumi was puzzled since she never expected that Luru had a magic talent. Meanwhile, while Luru arrived at the ruin, Gran, together with the kids, was still at the ruins, surrounded by magical machines. He informed the kids that these monsters were activated but wouldn't attack. However, it was possible that these monsters would react to moving targets, so he asked the kids not to move until he gave the signal. As expected, Rusty, Mai and Yuri were scared to death. Gran informed the kids that he couldn't do anything at this rate. Luru suddenly came to them and called Gran. Gran was shocked upon seeing Luru. He asked Luru why he came and what happened to Yumi. Luru then informed him that Yumi was at the village, casting a barrier to protect the people inside. Gran was mad at him for coming, ordering him to hide behind him together with his friends. Luru was glad to see everyone fine. He looked at the opponents of Gran. He knew that these monsters were called Rups Gigantes, originally built for civil work, but they were sometimes used as combatants in emergency situations. Though he was also sure that it was only he who could stop these titans, he didn't want to just back down and let Gran fight alone. The cannon abyss that was flying into the village had really high accuracy for its attack, and he concluded that these titans probably had the same purpose and were going to attack from this range. He walked toward the titans while Gran was telling him to stop, but he didn't listen at all. Despite Gran begging him, his friends were also worried for his sake and were asking him to stop what he was doing, since Gigantes were dangerous. Luru slightly looked at them and told them not to worry since he was fine. He also told Gran that he was counting on him. As he drew nearer to the beast, it spotted him, and its eyes glowed with fear. Gigantes failed to attack Luru, so he stayed composed and halted his movements. All it did was stare at him. He proceeded to declare that the area immediately surrounding him was the boundary. He reasoned that Gigantes would spare him and his companions an assault if they stayed away from the ruin. After that, Gran mentioned that these monsters may be employed to safeguard the ruin. Although he agreed with Gran, Luru, unable to see why Gigantes would choose to guard the ruin. He couldn't help but stare at the ruin. Since he couldn't recall ever having anything to do with its construction, he reasoned that it had likely been constructed after he had passed away. He informed Gran that he had to go inside for a quick inspection. Gran would not budge from her previous position as anticipated. I won't allow you to risk your life. Besides, this incident is our fault in the first place. Just stay silent and come here, exclaimed Grandma. He shared Yumi's belief that Luru lacked the physical maturity to fight due to his youth. So you're saying it should be fine as long as I'm strong enough, right? Questioned Luru. He boldly declared that the ruin is accessible to anyone with genuine ability. Gran confirmed his suspicions, and Luru wasted no time racing toward the ruin. All the while Gran pleaded with him to turn around. He dashed unimpeded toward the ruin's entrance, and Gigantes caught wind of his approach. In preparation for an assault, the Titan raised its blade, but Luru, using his magical abilities, leaped incredibly high. He slammed one of the Titans with his tightly closed fist. When Gran and the other 3 children saw his strength, they were astounded. The 2 Titans stared at Luru as he touched down on the ground. With a grin on his face, Luru returned their gaze. He skillfully evaded an attack from a Titan using only his bare hands. Without hesitation, he retrieved the Titan's weapon and swung it at the Titans, obliterating the 2 remaining Titans. The news startled Gran. After that, Luru observed him and inquired as to whether or not his abilities were sufficient to do a work. Gran didn't know what to say. Finally, he gave Luru permission to enter the ruin, but only on one condition. He wanted to be sure that Luru would be safe within, so he asked Yumi to accompany him or himself. The ruin, he said, was a major find, hence, it would cause problems down the road if simply a child were to enter. For the time being, he would return to the ruin without further ado and return the 3 children to the hamlet. He hoped Luru wouldn't venture much more on her own. He offered Luru the choice of going back to the hamlet with him immediately or waiting until he returned, if he could halt the equipment inside the ruin. Luru proceeded to say that he would be okay with it if he returned the children first. After that, he cautioned his companions to be careful on their return journey. After promising him, Rusty explained that they were unable to match Luru's speed. Yuri hoped that Luru would likewise take good care of herself after Mia revealed that they had caused difficulty, and Yuri apologized. After Luru waved them off, they departed from the ruin. He turned his attention back to the ruin's entrance when the children and Gran had slipped his eyes, and he resolved to wait for Gran inside. He discovered the device that controlled the monsters ravaging the town as he stepped inside. He attempted to exert control over it while also gathering information, which led him to discover that ranged attack machines were no longer in existence. Surprisingly, the machine situated outside the ruin was entirely dedicated to defense. Then it occurred to him, maybe someone wanted to keep something here and this ruin was only a cover. Additionally, Luru intended to investigate the ruin's vast interior room right this second. Recalling Gran's instruction to hold off until his return, though, recalled his words. Because he had made a promise, he was reluctant to break it. Ultimately, he leaned against the wall in the corridor waiting for Gran. He was worried that the overwhelming amount of background noise would bring back memories of his wild party days in a building very similar to this one. He, along with everyone else, was incredibly active during that time in his past life. Thankfully, Gran returned and phoned him, alleviating his immense sadness. Seeing the sorrow in his eyes, Gran apologized for his tardiness. With a small smile, Luru pretended everything was okay. He rose up and rationalized his decision to lean on the wall for a moment by saying that it was just somewhat cold inside the ruins. Gran eventually gave her approval because they were still below ground. Luru inquired once again whether the enchanted machines had ceased their operations. Gran cheerfully confirmed that all systems had been successfully turned off. He inquired as to how Luru had brought it about, since he knew it was all because of Luru. Then Luru lied and said he touched objects at random. When Luru messed up Yumi's barrier, Gran reminded him that she was angry with him. After assuring everyone that everything would be alright, Luru explained that he could simply rewrite the spell. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to rewrite a spell? Even a decent magician would take several minutes. Use as a top-class magician, you know, said Gran. As the owner of the barrier, humans would be able to rewrite the magic quickly according to Luru, who only listened to him. I was wondering whether rewriting is still used in modern times. When we return to the village, I will remove the barrier. The most crucial thing is that there appears to be another chamber farther in. Let's go ahead and check it out, he said. They reached the room Luru had mentioned after what seemed like an eternity. There were imprints of various hues on the towering door. For a moment they froze, uncertain if this door belonged to the ruin. The door still didn't appear to be going to open, so Gran had to force it open. The doors of the ruins, he claims, will open under specific circumstances. He proceeded to inform Luru that he had discovered certain conditions within the system that may unlock the door. However, Luru recalled that there was no such feature. It would be inconvenient to return to the machine. Possibly there's another way to open it, he said, touching the door. A magical wave was poured over him as he touched the door, and an energy confirmation washed over him. Someone outside the door Luru had paired with the Demon King Luruslia Nord, according to a voice he later heard. Would you like me to open the door for you? The voice sang. It astounded our hero that the system could identify him as the Demon Lord. Crystals started to light, and the door started to open in the very next second. Despite the peculiarity of the circumstance, our heroes chose to enter the building since the entrance had already been left open. A hemispherical ceiling adorned the interior of the room, which was quite large. A see-through cylindrical container was located in the center. Upon observing this, Luru promptly recalled that it was a pill designed for extended periods of sleep. They would still be in a position to keep their race alive even if they lost. Now when the hope of all demons was before him, Luru had died prematurely without ever knowing if the research had been fruitful. Did someone happen to be inside? Would reuniting with his old pal be possible? Without hesitation, Luru's attention was captivated by the capsule. At that very time, all he desired was to have someone present. He looked into the capsule with relief. A stunning young woman slept restlessly within the see-through capsule. She was instantly identified as Iris by Luru. She was the same one he had recalled from his battle with the heroine. He recalled her expression as he felt remorse for forgetting to wish her a happy birthday. He was able to reunite with her after 1,000-year separation. In contrast, Gran had no idea what was happening or why the capsule contained a human. Luckily, Gran mistook her for a regular human because the people back then didn't understand the peculiarities of demons. Luru too had to act ignorant because he had no other option. He advised the explorer to assess the girl's health by opening up. Gran had never seen anything like this before, so he had no idea how to open the capsule. Our hero had to figure it out on his own. He extended his hand in the same manner as the last occasion, drawing on his experience with opening the door. The voice resurfaced, as Luru had anticipated. Without delay he sent the command to turn off the long sleep feature. In response to his command, the device turned off immediately. A flush of redness returned to Iris's once pale face. You could now see her chest rising and falling, even though she hadn't moved or breathed a little. The most important thing was that she was alive. Seeing her again brought up a wave of nostalgia for Luru, even if he couldn't put a finger on how long it had been since they last met. He began to recall the pleasant times they had spent together, the joy on his friend's face, and the fact that she had just given birth. He cherished those times. The capsule's lid eventually came loose after a horizontal line showed up on it. After a long, serious period, Iris finally opened her eyes. Although it was brief, this breathtaking sight captivated Luru and Gran. The girl glanced at Gran the very next second. Being a seasoned warrior, he knew right away that things were not good. Because she was hazardous, he yelled out to Luru to be careful right away. But then he soared and slammed against the wall. Luru stared at Iris with confusion, oblivious to what was going on. But the girl he remembered was not there before him. A genuine demon, hell-bent on murder, stood before him. We all know that humans and demons were never meant to coexist together, and our hero kept this in mind when he found himself transformed into a human. After seeing the rage and venom in Iris's crimson eyes and hearing her icy voice yell, "Humans must die," Luru knew they were enemies from that point on. The vigilant nature that had served him well throughout his tenure as a demon lord had slipped Luru's grasp after 7 years of tranquil human life. Iris had thought nothing of attacking him the second after that. Luru knew that the Iris he knew lacked such strength. She was still a young girl, her mana was still in its growth spurt, and she still had years to go before she could control magic. It was fatal to take a direct strike from such kind of weapon. Iris felt like everything was over when she realized she had killed a human. A melancholy grin spread across her face. Former Demon King, whom she referred to as Gamma, was the target of her hushed threats of revenge. But then her astonishment grew exponentially larger. The youngster who ought to have perished was the one responsible for that. He was still alive after she attacked. More than that, he possessed her magical abilities. Even for reborn demon lore, her strikes were too weak. At this point, Luru saw that Iris had mastered the skill of power control. He appropriated her magic and used it to his advantage by dividing it into 4 parts and juggling the 4 mana spheres. Reliving his days as a demon lord was an obsession for Luru. When small demons lost their parents, the demon lord would come and play with them. There was little need in playing the games, but they did improve combat. It was like playing snowballs in a magic bullet war. Their training and preparation for battle were the primary goals of all of this. Luru was playing magic bullets and Iris was watching intently. Not only should no one be aware of it, but even if they were mastering it would take more than a few days. In addition, Luru currently had over a dozen magic bullets, and the issue wasn't just with the amount but also with the pace. Not every demon possessed the ability to soar through the air without making contact. Uncle was the only one Iris knew who could pull this off. She had an air of self-assurance in her barely audible voice. After realizing he couldn't compete with the demon lord's looks, Luru grinned cynically as usual. Iris recalled hearing, "Iris, Uncle is here," and with a look of shock and tears streaming down her cheeks, she opened her wide eyes. She hurried over to our hero and held on firmly, as if she would never let go. Since he had missed her for the same amount of time, Luru could empathize with her feelings and gently caressed her head. But being so much taller than her was something he wasn't used to. Later on he stole a quick look at Gran. Realizing that he had merely lost consciousness, Armor was not dead and appeared to be in quite good condition despite taking a battering. Luru felt a wave of relief wash over him. The previous magic bullet she had employed produced results that were very similar to those of a soldier's weapon. Our heroine reflected on the fact that her magical abilities had evolved since she last encountered such primitive spells. Her joy-filled tears proved that despite her strength, she was still a child at heart. It made Luru giggle to see her in such a state. As soon as he brought up the subject, Iris pouted and reluctantly started to explain how she had lived her life seeking revenge. But as she calmed down and became rational, she saw a dramatic change in her uncle's appearance. She could only identify him by his magical prowess because his voice and physique had transformed. He had assumed he had died all along, so naturally she was filled with questions now that he was standing before her. Since Luru was unable to provide her with an exhaustive explanation all at once, he assured her that he will do so at a later time. Shifting her focus to Gran, Iris pondered whether he was okay. He was only unconscious, our hero told her, but she would have to apologize to him later. He implied that his unconsciousness had been an accident. While Gran was unconscious, Luru volunteered to speak with Iris because he had many questions for her. Iris was just as eager to ask a lot of questions, so she was happy to oblige. Luru wanted to know if Iris truly thought it was him before they started talking because he clearly didn't resemble the previous Demon Lord Luruslia Nord. But much to his astonishment, she had absolutely no doubts about it. Luru was taken aback since he had doubts about her willingness to believe him without conditions. Iris told him that he was playing with magic bullets, which is why she noticed it when he questioned how she knew. Luruslia Nord was the only demon capable of controlling such a vast quantity of mana. Even after hearing that, our hero couldn't believe it because in his opinion, her father was capable of doing anything similar. Furthermore, his newly formed physique was not yet fully matured, thus it was unable to exhibit its full potential. This was denied by Iris. Her father, who was once known as Tassa, was a harsh guy who was rarely given such explicit instructions. Although Grandpa Mythos was capable, he was only interested in research. Renee, his older sister, couldn't care less about anything but destroying things with massive quantities of mana. He got the point that Iris was making, that Mythos was a crazy scientist, and that Renee intended to use strong magic to detonate things. Remembering them nearly brought our hero to tears as Luru recalled them. Although they had both been a source of trouble for him throughout the time, he still loved them deeply. Iris felt bad about initiating what would have been a less than pleasant chat for him when she saw him in this state. On the other hand, Luru responded that he was able to recall numerous positive aspects because of her. Iris got back on track by asking why he was in a human form, which was the original subject of their talk. To begin with, she wanted to know what had transpired. What was he to tell her about all of this? Luru pondered. Iris, he realized, had not always been a demon with an insatiable hatred of humans. Rather, she had simply disliked them as a race because of their history of conflict. But the expression on her face as she regained consciousness made it quite plain that she hated people. Luru chose to respond simply by saying that he had been resurrected so as not to drag out the explanation. It wasn't that the girl had heard anything unbelievable, rather, it was that she had been told something incredibly happy which caused her to open her eyes wide and look at Luru in utter bewilderment. After a while Luru finally said that. Iris had asked, so after his death Uncle was reborn as a human? A twinge of familiarity washed over him. He hadn't laid eyes on her in a decade, and it was plain to see. She had grown taller, but the purity he recalled in her eyes remained. She was obviously trying to make a good impression, since Luru could tell that her voice was a mixture of excitement and apprehension. After gathering himself, Gran moved forward to embrace her return to their life. Iris, is that actually you? His voice quivered just a little as he inquired. Joy in Iris's eyes shone through as she grinned at him. Uncle Gran, I say yes. Here I am. Emotion filled Gran's heart. It was hard for him to comprehend that his long-lost niece was finally standing before him. A tremendous feeling of relief washed over him, even though he still remembered the bitter memories of loss and the time apart. You've come a long way, baby. As he drew her into an embrace, he whispered, I missed you every day. Luru felt a mixture of joy and sadness as she witnessed the reunion. He had witnessed Iris's development as a result of their connection, and now he was experiencing the joy of seeing love between relatives. In the same breath as it offered a glimmer of optimism for the future, it served as a somber reminder of what has passed. Gran let her go after a little while, gazing into her eyes as she brushed a fly hair behind her ear. No matter where we looked, Iris, we couldn't find you. No one ever told us we would see you again. She whispered an apology, her eyes welling up with tears. I wish to shield everyone. He acknowledged her comments with a nod, realizing their significance. Time for you to come home, and I'm here to help you heal. A wave of joy and relief washed over Iris, and she smiled at him. It's wonderful to be back. Luru witnessed Iris' heart lighten with a glimmer of optimism. As long as they were together, he believed they could conquer any obstacle that came their way. The road to recovery would be long, but they would grow closer with each rekindled memory and shared laugh. As soon as she stepped out of the capsule, Luru recalled the exact moment she assaulted him. He swung his blade around and assumed a battle posture. He wanted to know why Luru was chatting with the girl who was attempting to kill them, as he couldn't make sense of what was happening. To this Luru responded that she would not launch another assault, and that everything was simply a misunderstanding. Gran let down his sword as he noticed the girl's change in attitude about killing. Despite this, the adventurer remained perplexed as to her motivation for attacking him. I was mistaken for an enemy of someone important to me, Iris said, her voice betraying her sincere remorse. She expressed her deepest apologies, stating that she was wronged. Gran was taken aback by the fact that a child of that age already had an adversary. Nevertheless, he was no longer taken aback by her extraordinary magical abilities. The world could be a very harsh place. Gran said he would simply chalk it up to an accident and didn't take offense. At that same moment, Iris and Luru thought that he was a truly kind guy. Since the situation had resolved amicably, Gran proposed returning to the hamlet. Nevertheless, he inquired as to the girl's purpose in being there beforehand. Luru said that it was nearly hard to tell how long she had been in the area, but that it was likely that she had slipped into an enemy trap. He reasoned that she could remain in the community for the time being since she likely no longer had parents. Thankfully, Gran was a naive man who took our hero at his word. He consented to accompany Iris to the village on the grounds that she was more likely to wind up in the slums if she ventured to the city. Once they had resolved the issue, they made their way to the ruins exit. Gran, though, continued to question whether or not they were, in fact, the work of long-vanished demons long after they had departed from the site. Even though Luru lacked the evidence to confirm the claim's veracity, he was certain that they had ties to the demonic race. That was proven by Iris, and he was able to reunite with her thanks to them. Iris was his sole remaining company at the moment, and he finally felt safe enough to confide in her about the truth of his prior life, which he had carried alone. Their thoughts were converging. Luru gazed at her fixedly while he thought about it. Luru, who had been enchanted, finally snapped out of his reverie when Iris noticed his look and grinned. Simultaneously, Gran summoned them. Seeing as Yumi wasn't there, he proposed that they bring her along so they could tour the ruins thoroughly. The discovery of these artifacts was significant to him. He really wants to be famous and busy, Luru joked, adding that he was envious of him. His remarks were taken seriously by Gran, who responded by saying that he too would become renowned. According to Iris, he deserves credit for finding the ruins. At 7 years old, no one would have believed Luru, so he remained skeptical. Nevertheless, Gran stepped in and offered to personally recommend him. Luru was taken aback by this. Luru wasn't exactly hoping for Gran to spill the beans about all the marvels he'd accomplished. Our hero paused for a moment before asking Gran to cease. He was unable to reveal his identity as a demon lord since he preferred not to live in secrecy. However, acknowledgement and compensation would be appreciated. Contrarily, such notoriety was not encouraging. Gran, seeing our hero's expression, told him he could tell him about the fame he truly desired if he wanted it bad enough, but he had a feeling Luru wouldn't be interested in it, so he decided to remain silent. Luru felt a great sense of comfort when Gran assured him that he would not make his life more difficult. He was confident in his ability to trust him. The sound of crashing rubble abruptly cut him off from his thoughts. He had even pondered telling Gran the whole truth. A mere mound of stones remained when they finally turned around. Because Gran made money off of the ruins, he was ashamed. It turns out though that this was actually rather common. This occurred frequently while he was in Yumi's company. Finally, Gran figured it was better than nothing, so she took a little bit of the miraculous machinery that was lying around. He was certain though that Yumi would cry her eyes out the moment she learned the truth. As they neared the settlement, Luru thought about how he would meet the elf. He clearly took great satisfaction in her magical abilities, but he had simply erased the barrier and imprisoned her. Yumi was still tending to the barrier when they returned, so she was ready to greet them. Even from a distance of tens of meters, her murderous purpose could be perceived. Despite the obvious symptoms of exhaustion on her face, her intense anger was immediately apparent. Luru tried to apologize after guessing Yumi's anger source, but she wouldn't hear him out. She was so angry with him that she began yelling at him the second he crossed her path. Luru looked to Gran and Iris as if to beg for their assistance. In such a predicament, Gran said, not even he could stop Yumi. It brought up a flood of memories for Iris, so she was likewise not too motivated to lend a hand. Following the scolding, which in Luru's opinion felt more severe, he simply fainted since the hour-long yelling had sapped all of his vitality. Yumi said she had ensured Rusty and the others were taken to the village, which sounded like a severe beating. He got the impression that his mom didn't realize he was magical, so she just assured her son that he would be okay with Gran. She would let him handle the remaining explanations. Luru deeply appreciated her thoughtfulness in keeping his secret a secret. Because Yumi had never been successful in doing it herself, she felt compelled to ask our hero to remove the barrier, even though it was an uncomfortable request. Although Luru was willing to do it, Iris had already started. Just in time, she drew near the barrier and placed her hand on it. Her spell utterly dismantled the barrier in an instant. Because what had just transpired was so unbelievable, Yumi was rendered speechless. While Gran and Yumi were trying to come to terms with what had transpired, Iris smiled nonchalantly. Iris said to Luru in a whisper that she had yelled at him excessively and felt she had no other alternative but to do revenge. Although he was appreciative that she was concerned, Luru politely requested her assistance the next time it was necessary. Everyone was probably exhausted from today's events, so Gran recommended they head home. He chose to accompany Luru and Iris out on his own, sending Yumi, who was still in shock, to the inn. The elf made a threatening statement, saying that they would have to tell her everything tomorrow. As he neared his house, Luru noticed that his mom was waiting for him, as he had anticipated. Luru had an overwhelming sense of dread as he stared at her. He could not see any signs of wrath or displeasure on her face. Medea, his mother, was always peaceful and generous, but our hero had never witnessed her in this light. Quietly, as if repressing certain emotions, she inquired as to his whereabouts. Luru knew his mom wanted to hear it from him, even if Yumi should have informed her before. He couldn't deny going to the ruins as his response. My mom's palm cut the air when he uttered those words. Knowing he couldn't avoid the smack, Luru accepted it despite his awareness of the situation. After hearing a bang, Luru felt a sharp ache in his cheek. However, Medea felt the impact more than Luru. Medea cautiously walked up to Luru after the hit and gave him a tender embrace. She expressed her deep concern for him in a whisper, her voice filled with tears. In response, Luru admitted that he had acted wrongly, but that it had been essential. Just knowing he was guilty was enough for his mom. He made the decision to stop and let the matter drop. Glancing over to Gran, she inquired as to whether Luru had served him any purpose. The truth has to come out of him. He informed her that the village had been attacked by a magical device that had suddenly activated. There would have been incalculable damage and casualties if Luru hadn't intervened in time. Luru and Gran's relief at not knowing the details and at attributing it all to his father's instruction was well received by the media. A girl standing by Gran's side abruptly drew her focus. As if it were her first encounter with her, Medea inquired as to whether or not she was certain that she wasn't from their village. As she bowed and introduced herself, Iris confirmed that they had never met before. She claimed that she had been sound asleep in the ruins when Gran and Luru discovered her. She spoke with conviction and passion, which made Medea believe what she said. Among her story, Iris detailed the death of a loved one, the pursuit by her adversaries, and her eventual slumber among the wreckage. Her parents were no longer in her life. Medea embraced the sobbing youngster after listening to her story and commented on how terrifying it must have been for her to be so young to be on her alone. He extended an invitation to Iris to be with them without any deliberation. Even though it was embarrassing, Iris kept playing and said she couldn't ask for something like that. Medea quickly shifted her attention to Luru, inquiring if he would like to keep little Iris with them. He was a bit taken aback because, contrary to his expectations, he wasn't required to convince his mother. Media took it a step further and requested Iris to be her daughter after she noticed he wasn't objecting. He was confident her spouse would support her lifelong desire to have a daughter. It deviated slightly from what Iris had anticipated. Unfortunately, Media prevented her from raising an objection. He grinned and instructed her to contact her mom going forward. Even though Iris was still confused about everything, she followed instructions and called Media mom. Media immediately began embracing Iris when she did. Her daughter's status was now formally established. Iris glanced across to Luru and asked for her advice. Given his familiarity with her mother, our hero could only offer the advice to quit. Since being the daughter of nobles wasn't exactly a picnic, Gran also assumed that everything had gone swimmingly. He announced his intention to return to the inn due to the advancing hour. Just before he departed, he kindly urged Luru to return to the inn so they could continue discussing anything. Following his farewell to Gran, Luru, accompanied by his mother and Iris, returned home. Our hero was pleased, though it seemed weird to learn that the daughter of his best friend would be his younger sister. That, as promised, the following morning, she would be there to greet him. Despite his and Iris's best efforts, they were met with Yumi's sour words about being too slow the moment they opened the door to welcome Gran and Yumi. She looked at them disapprovingly and inquired where she should begin. When everyone had assembled, Luru wanted to know what everyone wanted to talk about. Gran in particular was curious about his experiences with the Yumi barrier and how he had learnt the method. According to our hero, they needed to swear an oath of secrecy before he could reveal the secret. Yu swore without hesitation, but Luru's power made it clear that she was being dishonest. Luru advised Yumi to attempt to fool him once more, despite her belief that he was merely bluffing. He could tell without a doubt whether she was being truthful after asking her a few questions. His skills astounded Yumi all over again. Being adventurers, it was their direct obligation to report to the leader of their guild. Despite this realization, Luru insisted on using a contract spell as the only condition for divulging his secret. In the end, Yumi and Gran had both consented to this need. Our hero started the contracting procedure as soon as he obtained their agreement. Iris was equally comfortable sharing her story. His only stipulation was that they keep their secret from anybody else, including Iris. Suddenly, it was as if a tremendous power had shackled Yumis and Gran. Everything returned to normal after a little interruption. The contract had been formally terminated. Although Luru was uncertain about their receptivity, he informed them that he and Iris were long-lost demons. Yumi didn't believe it as he had anticipated. Ancient demons were magnificent creatures, according to her own studies. Without hesitation, she wanted evidence. Luru couldn't help but point out how effortlessly he could alter her barrier. It was accurate, no wizard of her caliber could pull it off. Since the ancestry of the aristocracy could not possibly include someone with demon blood, Gran continued to harbor misgivings as well. It was surprising that people in the modern human world were also familiar with the concept of reincarnation, but Luru didn't know how to explain it at first because he thought it was exclusively prevalent among demons. Things were made much easier as a result. According to Luru, he was actually a reincarnation of an old demon who had taken up human form. According to him, he and Iris had crossed paths in a past life, and their reconnection was purely coincidental. Iris corroborated his statements and elaborated that she had not lied about losing a loved one under the rubble. The individual in question was Luru, her father's best friend. Since she was a little girl, she had a soft spot for him due to his generosity. She went on to describe the conflict, Luru's death, and her attempts at revenge, but she woke up in this world after being captured. Yumi was perplexed as to why Iris treated Luru as a subordinate, even though Gran and Yumi were convinced of her statements based on the way she recounted them. In response, Luru revealed that he had once been able to command all demons. His previous incarnation, he claimed, was that of Luruslia Nord, the 100th Demon Lord.